1874. Iron Mesa, Wyoming Territory. Jean Prescott stood in the dusty main street outside the cattleman's bank, her father's ranch ledger clutched tight against her chest. Watching Rufus Ashford's hired guns load her cattle onto rail cars she couldn't afford to stop. The heat wave had cracked every board in town and left tempers shorter than winter stores. She was a schoolteacher who'd inherited a failing ranch 3 months ago. And now the only man between her and ruin was a grizzled trapper who'd just been offered her hand in marriage as part of a land deal. Hector Garrett stood 10 feet away, dusty leather vest open over a faded blue shirt, gray-blue eyes fixed on the rail cars, with the stillness of a man who'd learned patience in the mountains. He hadn't said yes yet. The banker, Simon Polk, waited on the bank steps with a stack of papers Jean knew were forged, but she had no proof. Rufus Ashford, the cattle baron who owned half the valley and wanted the other half, smiled at her from beneath his silver-tongued charm and collected debts like trophies. He'd been obsessed with her since the spring social, and the next train arrived in 2 days. If she didn't pay by then, the ranch was his. Hector finally turned to her, his voice low and rough.
I don't make deals with women's lives.
Jean felt her breath catch.
Then what do you call this?
She gestured at the papers the lawyer had drawn up that morning. The ones that said if Hector married her before sunset, the ranch would stay in her name, but he'd have legal standing to challenge Polk's claim.
I call it a chance to do something right.
He stepped closer, close enough she could see the lines the sun had carved around his eyes.
But I won't treat you like a bargain. If we do this, we do it real.
Jean's heart hammered. She was independent to a fault, her father had always said, and the idea of needing anyone made her skin prickle. But Hector wasn't offering to own her. He was offering to stand beside her.
Real means I still run the ranch.
Real means I don't let Ashford or his banker take it from you.
He held out his hand. She hesitated, then took it. His palm was calloused and warm, and the grip was firm but not crushing. Across the street, Rufus Ashford watched them from the saloon porch, his smile tight. Simon Polk descended the bank steps, his forged papers tucked under his arm. The preacher's house was 2 blocks east, a narrow clapboard building with a crooked gate. Jean and Hector walked in silence, the heat pressing down like a weight. When they reached the door, Hector stopped.
Before we do this, you need to know something. Polk's not working alone. Ashford's paying him to call in loans early, then buying the land at auction for half price. I've seen the ledger.
Jean stared at him.
You've seen it? How?
I used to trap for Ashford's outfit before I figured out what kind of man he was. He keeps a second ledger in his office, safe. Every forged note, every rigged auction, all recorded.
Her pulse jumped.
Can you get it?
Not without getting shot. But if we had leverage, maybe we could force his hand.
Jean thought of the quilt her mother had made, the one she'd been stitching a new square into every night since her father died. Each square held a note, a record of debts paid and promises kept. She'd stitched one last night, a promise to herself that she'd save the ranch no matter what it took.
I have an idea.
She pulled the folded quilt square from her skirt pocket, the stitching still fresh. On it, she'd written in tiny, careful thread, I, Jean Prescott, promise to stand witness to the truth, no matter the cost. She handed it to Hector.
If we're doing this real, Then we make a promise neither of us expected. You help me get that ledger, and I'll stand witness. Together.
Hector unfolded the square, read the stitching, then looked at her with something raw in his eyes.
You're braver than most men I know.
I'm desperate. There's a difference.
No. There's not.
He tucked the square into his vest pocket, then knocked on the preacher's door. The ceremony took 5 minutes. The preacher's wife served as witness, and Jean signed her name in the registry with a hand that only shook a little. Hector signed beside her, his script surprisingly neat. When the preacher asked if they'd honor and cherish, Hector said yes, without hesitation. Jean said yes, and meant it more than she'd expected. They walked back into the heat, married, and Jean felt the weight of it settle not like a chain, but like armor. Hector didn't try to take her hand again. He just walked beside her, his stride matching hers.
Ashford's office is above the saloon. He'll be at the cattle auction until sunset. That gives us 2 hours.
And Polk?
He'll be there too, making sure Ashford gets every head at bottom price.
Jean nodded.
Then we go now.
They slipped into the alley behind the saloon, the back stairs creaking under their boots. Hector picked the lock on Ashford's office door in 30 seconds, his hands steady. Inside, the room smelled of cigars and leather. The safe sat in the corner, black iron with a brass dial.
I can't crack it.
Jean scanned the room, her schoolteacher's eye catching details. A stack of correspondence on the desk, a calendar with dates circled, a framed map of the valley with properties marked in red ink. She opened the desk drawer and found a small brass key taped to the underside.
Try this.
Hector took it, fitted it to the safe's secondary lock, and turned. The door swung open. Inside, the ledger sat on top of a stack of deeds. Hector pulled it out, flipped it open, and Jean saw row after row of names, dates, amounts. Her father's name was there, with a note beside it. Loan called early. Note dated March. Actual signature October. Forged. She felt rage bloom hot in her chest.
He killed my father with this. The stress. The worry. It broke him.
We'll make him pay.
A floorboard creaked in the hallway. Hector shoved the ledger inside his vest, closed the safe, and grabbed Jean's wrist.
Window.
They ran for the side window, Hector throwing it open and dropping to the alley below. He caught Jean as she jumped, her skirt tangling, his arms solid around her. They hit the ground and rolled. And then they were running, boots pounding dirt, the shout of Ashford's men rising behind them. Jean's lungs burned. Hector pulled her into the livery stable, past the startled stable hand, and out the back into the corral. 2 horses stood saddled, left by riders taking a drink in the saloon. Hector didn't hesitate. He swung onto the first, a big roan gelding, and pulled Jean up behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, the ledger pressed between them, and then they were galloping, the stable hand's shout lost in the thunder of hooves. They rode hard for the edge of town, past the schoolhouse where Jean had taught last spring, past the church where they'd be expected for Sunday service tomorrow if they lived that long. The road split at the creek ford, one path leading to Jean's ranch, the other into the hills. Hector took the hills.
Why not the ranch?
Ashford's men will go there first. We need to get this ledger to the territorial marshal in Carter's Bluff.
That's a 2-day ride.
One day, if we don't stop.
Jean tightened her grip.
Then, we don't stop.
The hills rose steep and red around them, the heat shimmering off the rocks. Hector pushed the roan hard, taking switchbacks at a reckless pace, the horse's breath coming in great heaving gasps. Behind them, dust rose in a column. Riders, at least 4. Hector glanced back, swore, and urged the roan faster. They crested the ridge as the sun touched the horizon, the sky bleeding gold and orange. Hector pulled the roan to a halt in a stand of pines, the horse's sides heaving. Jean slid down, her legs shaking.
They're still coming.
I know.
He dismounted, pulled his rifle from the saddle scabbard, and checked the load. Jean watched him, her heart pounding.
You're going to fight them?
I'm going to slow them down. You keep riding. Follow this trail north until you hit the Carter Road, then east to the marshal's office.
I'm not leaving you.
Jean.
He turned to face her, and the rawness in his eyes stopped her breath.
If they catch us both, this was for nothing. Your father's name stays ruined. Ashford keeps stealing, and Polk keeps forging. You have to get that ledger to the marshal.
Not without you.
She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into the worn leather of his vest.
We made a promise. Together.
Hector stared at her, something breaking loose in his expression. Then he nodded, shoved the rifle back in the scabbard, and pulled her close. His kiss was brief and fierce, tasting of dust and desperation.
Then, we ride together.
They swung back onto the roan, Jean in front this time so Hector could shoot if he had to, and plunged down the far side of the ridge. The trail was narrow, barely wide enough for the horse, rocks loose under the hooves. Jean leaned forward, trusting the roan's footing, Hector's arm tight around her waist. A shot cracked behind them, the bullet sparking off stone. Jean flinched, but Hector didn't slow. They hit the bottom of the ridge at a dead run and broke into open grassland. The Carter Road was a pale line in the dusk, 2 miles ahead. The riders were closer now, close enough Jean could hear them shouting. Hector pulled his revolver, twisted in the saddle, and fired 3 times. One of the riders went down, his horse veering off. The others kept coming. They hit the Carter Road just as full dark fell. The roan stumbled, caught itself, and Jean felt the horse's strength faltering.
You can't keep this pace.
Half a mile more. There's a way station.
They made it with the roan's head drooping, foam on its neck. The way station was a low adobe building with a single lantern burning in the window. Hector pounded on the door. An old man opened it, shotgun in hand, then lowered it when he saw Jean. The station keeper let them inside, gave the roan water and grain, and listened while Hector explained in short, hard sentences. The old man nodded, said the marshal was due through in the morning on his circuit, and offered them the back room. Jean collapsed onto a narrow cot, her body shaking with exhaustion. Hector sat on the floor, his back against the door, rifle across his knees.
Sleep. I'll keep watch.
Jean wanted to argue, but her eyes were already closing. She woke to voices, low and urgent. Hector was at the window, the old station keeper beside him. The old man warned that Ashford's men had surrounded the building, and the marshal wouldn't arrive until mid-morning. Hector swore, checked his revolver, and looked at Jean.
We're pinned.
Then, we make them come to us.
She stood, pulled the ledger from Hector's vest, and opened it to her father's page.
If we can't get this to the marshal, we make the marshal come to us.
She tore the page out, wrote a message on the back in pencil. Ashford and Polk forging loans, stealing land. Proof here. Send help. She handed it to the station keeper.
Can you get this to the next station?
The old man nodded, slipped out the back, and was gone into the dark. Jean and Hector waited. Dawn came slow and red. Ashford's men didn't attack, just held position, waiting for orders. Then, an hour after sunrise, the sound of hooves. A lot of them. The marshal arrived with a deputy and 3 territorial rangers, all armed. Jean watched through the window as the marshal confronted Ashford's men, his voice carrying. The station keeper had delivered the message. The rangers surrounded the building, and Ashford's men were disarmed. The marshal knocked on the door. Hector opened it, handed over the ledger, and Jean gave her statement, every word clear and steady. The marshal read the ledger, his face hardening, then ordered his deputy to ride back to Iron Mesa and arrest Simon Polk. Ashford himself arrived an hour later, riding in with that silver-tongued smile, but it died when he saw the rangers. The marshal arrested him on the spot. Jean and Hector rode back to Iron Mesa with the marshal's escort, the ledger locked in the marshal's saddlebag. The town was quiet when they arrived. The heat still pressing down, but the tension broken. Simon Polk was already in the jail, and the marshal promised a circuit judge would arrive within the week to hear the case. Jean's ranch was safe. The forged notes were void. Her father's name was cleared. She stood in the main street, the same spot where this had started, and felt the weight lift. Hector stood beside her, silent.
You kept your promise.
We kept our promise.
He pulled the quilt square from his vest pocket, the stitching still bright.
You wrote about standing witness. You did that.
So did you.
She took the square, folded it carefully, and tucked it into her skirt pocket.
I need to go to the ranch, check the stock, see what's left.
I'll ride with you.
They collected their horses, rode out past the edge of town, and took the long road home. The ranch house was still standing, dusty and sun-beaten, but whole. Jean dismounted, walked through the empty rooms, and felt the ghosts of her father's voice in every corner. Hector waited on the porch, giving her space. When she came back out, he was sitting on the steps, hat in his hands.
I meant what I said, about doing this real.
So did I.
She sat beside him, close enough their shoulders touched.
I don't know how to do this. Be married. Run a ranch. Trust someone.
Neither do I.
He turned to look at her, and the honesty in his face made her chest ache.
But I'm willing to learn. If you are.
I am.
She leaned into him, and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They sat like that as the sun climbed higher, the heat settling over the valley, the ranch quiet around them. It wasn't easy. It wasn't soft. But it was real, and it was theirs. The week passed in hard work. Jean inventoried the stock, repaired fences, and started planning for spring roundup. Hector worked beside her, his hands as steady with hammer and wire as they'd been with a lockpick. They didn't talk much during the day, both too tired. But at night they sat on the porch and shared the silence. It was comfortable, the kind of quiet that came from understanding rather than emptiness. On Saturday, the circuit judge arrived, and the trial was held in the Cattleman's Bank building, the irony not lost on anyone. Jean testified, her voice clear and unwavering. Hector stood beside her, his presence a solid anchor. The judge reviewed the ledger, listened to the testimony, and ruled in Jean's favor. Simon Polk was sentenced to 10 years. Rufus Ashford was stripped of his holdings and banned from the territory. The stolen land was returned to its rightful owners. Jean walked out of the bank with the deed to her ranch, legally clear and fully hers. Hector walked beside her, his hand brushing hers.
You did it.
We did it.
That night, they sat on the porch again, the stars thick overhead. Jean held the quilt square, tracing the stitching with her finger.
I'm going to add another square. For this.
What will it say?
A promise kept.
She looked at him, and the warmth in his eyes made her brave.
And a new one. To keep learning. Together.
I like that.
He leaned in, and this time the kiss was slow and deep, a promise in itself. When they pulled apart, Jean smiled, the first real smile since her father had died.
I need to ask you something.
Anything.
That deal. The one where you were supposed to marry me and get the ranch. Do you still want it?
Hector was quiet for a moment, his gaze steady on hers.
I never wanted the ranch, Jean. I wanted you. The ranch was just an excuse to stay.
Then stay. Not because of a deal. Stay because you want to.
I do. I want to stay. I want to build this life with you. I want to wake up every morning and see you. I want to work this land and make it ours. I want everything.
She kissed him again, her heart full.
Then, we'll do it together. Sunday came, and the whole town turned out for the service. John wore her best dress, a simple pale blue cotton with white lace at the collar. Hector wore a clean shirt and his least worn trousers, his hair combed back. They sat together in the front pew, and when the preacher asked if anyone had announcements, Jean stood. I have one. Hector Garrett and I are getting married. Today. Right here.
The congregation erupted in whispers, then applause. The preacher, a kind man named Reverend Mills, smiled. Reverend Mills nodded his approval and gestured for them to come forward.
You sure about this?
I've never been more sure of anything.
They stood before the altar, hands clasped, and the preacher began the ceremony. The words were simple, the vows straightforward. Jean promised to love and honor, and Hector promised the same. When the preacher asked for the rings, Hector pulled out a simple gold band, one he'd bought from the jeweler with the last of his trapping money. Jean slipped it onto his finger, her hand steady. He did the same for her, the metal warm against her skin. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Hector kissed her, long and deep, while the congregation cheered. They walked out into the sunlight, and the town surrounded them, offering congratulations and well wishes. The sheriff shook Hector's hand, his grip firm. The banker's widow, a sharp-eyed woman named Mrs. Colloway, hugged Jean and whispered that she'd done well. The blacksmith offered to shoe their horses for free. The seamstress promised a wedding quilt. It was a celebration, simple and heartfelt, and Jean felt the weight of the past months lift. She was no longer alone. She had Hector, and she had the town, and she had her ranch. That evening, they rode back to the ranch together, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and gold. The heat wave had broken at last, and a cool breeze swept across the plains. Jean leaned against Hector in the saddle, his arms around her, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years.
What are you thinking?
That I'm glad you refused the deal.
Why?
Because this is better. This is real.
It is.
They reached the ranch as the first stars appeared. Hector helped her down, and they stood together in the yard, looking at the house, the barn, the land stretching out in all directions.
We have a lot of work ahead of us.
We do. But we'll do it together.
Together.
She kissed him, slow and sweet, and he held her close. The night was cool, the stars bright, and the future spread out before them like the open plains. They had fought for this, bled for it, and now it was theirs. Not because of a bargain, but because they had chosen each other.
Come on. Let's go inside.
In a minute. I just want to stand here and look at it. Our ranch. Our home.
Our home.
He tightened his arms around her, and she closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of dust and leather and him. The land was hard, the work endless, but she had him, and that made everything possible. They stood together under the stars, husband and wife, partners, in every sense. And the future was theirs to build. She married the trapper, who refused to treat it as a bargain. Iron Mesa, Wyoming Territory, 1874. Jean Prescott's ranch is days from foreclosure when a grizzled trapper named Hector Garrett arrives with a deal. Marry him, and he'll save her land. But Hector refuses to treat their union as a bargain, risking everything to protect her from a vengeful cattle baron and a crooked banker. In the heat of a Wyoming summer, two strangers bound by a promise stitched into a quilt square discover that the best deals are the ones made with the heart. A story of resilience, danger, and a love that refuses to be bought. Subscribe for more Wild West romance stories. Wild West romance, historical romance, cowboy love story, 1874 Wyoming, ranch romance, trapper hero, strong heroine, marriage of convenience, enemies to lovers, cattle baron villain, frontier justice, western adventure, happy ending romance, old west stories, authentic western tale, colorized late 1800s American West photograph. Natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust/scratches, slight vignetting, no text, no watermark. Ruggedly handsome cowboy in his mid-30s with sun-weathered tan skin, thick dark brown hair with slight waves swept back from forehead, piercing steel blue eyes with crow's feet at corners, strong jaw with 2-day stubble, lean muscular build around 6 feet tall, wearing a wide-brimmed brown leather cow, boy hat tilted back on his head, faded dark blue cotton work shirt with rolled-up sleeves showing tanned forearms, brown leather vest with brass buttons, dark gray wool trousers tucked into scuffed brown leather cowboy boots with worn spurs, brown leather gun belt, Beautiful woman in her late 20s with fair porcelain skin and a light dusting of freckles across her nose. Long chestnut brown hair swept into a practical low bun at the nape of her neck, with a few loose tendrils framing her face. Warm hazel eyes with gold flecks and visible tears of joy on her cheeks. Delicate features with high cheekbones and a radiant smile. Slender build around 5 feet 6 inches tall. Wearing a pale blue cotton day dress with white lace collar and long sleeves. Full skirt reaching to her ankles. Brown leather belt at waist. Small silver locket at her throat. Polished brown leather ankle boots. The man holds the woman protectively in his arms in the open doorway of a white wooden church, dipping her in a passionate kiss. Her arms wrapped around his neck, both bathed in warm golden afternoon sunlight streaming through the doorway, their bodies framed by the church entrance. Background shows the church interior, with wooden pews and townspeople clapping and cheering in mid-ground. Wildflower arrangements on the altar. A simple wooden cross on the wall. The church steps leading down to a dusty street, visible beyond the doorway. A decorated horse-drawn buggy, waiting at the bottom of the steps. Distant Wyoming hills and open sky with scattered clouds. Scattered wildflower petals on the church floor, and steps in foreground. Photorealistic cinematic style. Shot on cinema camera. Natural golden hour lighting. Shallow depth of field with soft bokeh background. Warm beige and amber color grading. Looks like a film still from a premium Western romance movie. Authentic 1800s period photography aesthetic. Professional portrait photog. Rafi quality. Bus/through before her father died.
We'll make new squares. A lot of them.
She laughed, and it was the sound of hope. The next morning, Sunday, Jean woke early and dressed in her best dress. The pale blue one she'd worn to town meetings before everything fell apart. She brushed her hair until it shone and pinned it up carefully. Hector stood in the doorway, watching her, and when she turned, his expression made her breath catch.
You're beautiful.
You clean up pretty well yourself.
He wore a clean shirt, his best vest, and his hat was brushed free of dust. They rode into town together, the morning light soft and golden. Iron Mesa was already stirring, folks heading to church. The heat wave finally broken by a blessed cool breeze. Jean felt eyes on them as they dismounted in front of the church, but she kept her head high. Hector walked beside her, his hand at the small of her back. Inside, the church was cool and dim, the smell of old wood and candle wax familiar and comforting. Jean slid into a pew near the back, Hector beside her. Reverend Hayes stood at the pulpit, his white hair gleaming in the light from the windows. The service began, hymns rising, prayers spoken. Jean felt the tension of the past weeks slowly unwinding. When the Reverend called for announcements, a murmur ran through the congregation. He stepped down from the pulpit and walked to where Jean and Hector sat. The Reverend's voice was gentle but firm. He told the congregation about the forged deeds, about Simon Polk's arrest, about the return of stolen land. He spoke of justice and mercy, of truth revealed and wrongs made right. Then, he turned to Jean.
Thank you, Reverend.
She stood, Hector rising beside her. The Reverend gestured for them to come forward. Jean's heart pounded, but she walked to the front, Hector's hand in hers. The congregation watched, silent. The Reverend held up the deed to Jean's ranch, freshly stamped by the judge. The Reverend announced that Jean Prescott's land was restored, free and clear. A few people clapped, then more, until the whole church was applauding. Jean felt tears prick her eyes. Hector squeezed her hand. The Reverend wasn't finished. He looked at Jean, then at Hector, his eyes twinkling. The Reverend asked if there was anything else they wished to share with the congregation. Jean glanced at Hector, and he nodded, a slow smile spreading across his face.
Yes, there is.
She turned to face the people, her voice steady.
Hector Garrett and I are getting married.
The applause this time was louder, mixed with laughter and a few shouts of congratulation. Jean felt her face flush, but she was smiling. Hector stepped closer, his arm around her waist.
Soon as possible.
The Reverend chuckled. The Reverend said he could perform the ceremony right now, if they were willing. Jean's breath hitched. She looked at Hector, searching his eyes.
Do you want to?
Yes.
It was the easiest answer she'd ever given. The congregation buzzed with excitement. Women hurried to gather wildflowers from the vases on the altar. Men rearranged the front pews. Someone ran to fetch the church register. Jean stood at the front of the church, Hector beside her, and it all felt surreal and perfect. The Reverend opened his Bible, his voice warm. The vows were simple, the old words spoken in the hush of the church. Jean's voice trembled, but she didn't falter.
I, John Prescott, take you, Hector Garrett, to be my husband, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part.
Hector's voice was rough, but clear.
I, Hector Garrett, take you, Jean Prescott, to be my wife, to have and to hold, from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part.
The Reverend pronounced them husband and wife. The Reverend told Hector he could kiss his bride. Hector didn't hesitate. He pulled Jean into his arms and kissed her, deep and thorough. And the church erupted in cheers. Jean clung to him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, the congregation was on its feet, applauding. Jean laughed, tears streaming down her face. Hector wiped them away with his thumb, his smile blinding.
Mrs. Garrett.
Mr. Garrett.
They signed the register right there, their names side by side, in black ink. Jean's hand shook a little, but Hector steadied it, his fingers warm over hers. They walked down the aisle together, hand in hand, the congregation following them out into the sunlight. The heat of the day was building, but it felt manageable now, not the crushing weight it had been. People crowded around, shaking their hands, offering congratulations. Jean saw faces she'd known all her life, neighbors who'd stood by her, and a few who hadn't, but were smiling now. She forgave them all. Hector accepted handshakes and backslaps, his arm never leaving Jean's waist. Someone had tied white ribbons to the buggy, and wildflowers were tucked into the harness. Jean laughed, shaking her head.
Who did this?
A group of women grinned, and one of them, Mrs. Hollis, stepped forward. Mrs. Hollis said it was the least they could do after everything Jean had done for the town. Jean hugged her, gratitude swelling in her chest. Hector helped her into the buggy, then climbed up beside her. He took the reins, and the horse started forward, the ribbons fluttering. People waved as they passed, and Jean waved back, her smile so wide it hurt. They rode out of town slowly, the church bells ringing behind them. The road stretched ahead, dusty and familiar, leading back to the ranch. Jean leaned against Hector, her head on his shoulder.
I can't believe we just did that.
Best decision I ever made.
Me too.
He kissed the top of her head, and Jean closed her eyes, feeling the sun on her face. The steady rhythm of the horse's hooves, the solid warmth of Hector beside her. The ranch came into view, the house small and weathered, but hers. Theirs now. Hector pulled the buggy to a stop in front of the porch. He climbed down, then lifted Jean out, holding her a moment longer than necessary.
Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett.
Welcome home, Mr. Garrett.
He carried her up the steps and over the threshold, and Jean laughed, her arms around his neck. Inside, the house was cool and quiet. Hector set her down gently, and they stood in the middle of the front room, just looking at each other.
I love you.
I love you too.
The words were simple, but they felt like a vow all over again. Hector cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and sweet. Jean melted into him, her hands sliding up his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Hector rested his forehead against hers.
We're going to make this work.
I know we will.
Jean led him to the quilt draped over the back of the couch, the one she'd been piecing together for years. She picked up the square with the stitched note, the one that had brought them together, and held it up.
This is where it started.
And this is where it keeps going.
Hector took her hand, lacing their fingers together. Jean looked at the quilt, at the squares that told the story of her life, and she knew there would be many more to add. Squares for laughter and hard work, for storms weathered and promises kept. Squares for love, deep and true. She set the quilt aside and turned to Hector, her husband, her partner.
Let's get started.
Yes, ma'am.
He grinned, and she kissed him again, and the future stretched out before them, bright and full of hope. They spent the rest of the afternoon settling in, unpacking the few things they'd brought back from town. Jean changed out of her wedding dress and into her work clothes, though Hector protested, saying she looked too beautiful to cover up. She laughed and swatted his arm, then handed him a hammer.
Beauty doesn't fix fences.
Fair point.
They worked side by side in the fading light, repairing a section of corral railing that had come loose. The work was familiar, grounding, and Jean felt a deep contentment settle over her. This was her life now, their life, and it was exactly what she wanted. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Hector straightened and wiped his brow.
That should hold.
Thank you.
Always.
They walked back to the house hand in hand, the evening air cooling around them. Inside, Jean lit the lamp and started pulling out supplies for supper. Hector stoked the fire in the stove, then leaned against the counter, watching her.
You know, I never thought I'd have this.
What?
A home. Someone to share it with.
Jean set down the bowl she was holding and crossed to him, slipping her arms around his waist.
You have it now. And I'm not letting you go.
Good.
He kissed her forehead, then her nose, then her lips, and Jean felt the warmth of it spread through her entire body. They made supper together, moving around the small kitchen with an easy rhythm, passing bowls and utensils without needing to ask. When the food was ready, they sat at the table, just the two of them, and ate in comfortable silence. Outside, the sky darkened, stars appearing one by one. After supper, they washed the dishes together, Hector drying while Jean scrubbed. When the last plate was put away, Jean turned to him, suddenly shy.
It's getting late.
It is.
Hector took her hand and led her to the bedroom. The room was simple, just a bed and a dresser, but it felt like theirs. Jean's heart pounded as Hector closed the door behind them. He turned to her, his expression tender.
We can take this slow.
I don't want slow.
She reached up and kissed him, pouring all her love and trust into it. Hector responded in kind, his arms wrapping around her, holding her close. They sank onto the bed together, and Jean felt safe, cherished, loved. The night stretched out around them, quiet and peaceful, and for the first time in a long time, Jean felt completely at ease. She belonged here, with him, and nothing would ever change that. Later, as they lay tangled together under the quilt, Hector stroked her hair, his touch gentle.
I'm the luckiest man alive.
I'm the lucky one.
We'll argue about that tomorrow.
Jean laughed softly, her eyes drifting closed.
Deal.
She felt Hector's chest rise and fall beneath her cheek, steady and strong, and she knew that whatever came next, they would face it together. Morning came soft and golden, light filtering through the thin curtains and spreading across the bedroom floor. Jean woke slowly, aware of Hector's warmth beside her, his arm draped over her waist. She turned carefully, not wanting to wake him, and studied his face in the early light. The hard edges she'd seen when they first met had softened. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, and Jean's heart swelled with love.
Morning.
His voice was rough with sleep, and his eyes opened, blue and clear.
Morning.
Sleep well?
Better than I have in years.
He pulled her closer, kissing her temple.
Good.
They lay there a while longer, wrapped in each other and the quiet of the new day. Eventually, the demands of the ranch pulled them from bed. Jean dressed quickly, braiding her hair while Hector pulled on his boots. They worked side by side through the morning, feeding the animals, checking the water troughs, inspecting the fences one more time. The heat was already building, but it felt manageable now, less oppressive. By noon, they were back at the house, dusty and tired but satisfied. Jean pumped water into a basin and washed her face and hands, then passed the towel to Hector.
I think we should ride out to the north pasture this afternoon. Make sure the cattle are settled.
Sounds good.
They saddled the horses and rode out together, the landscape stretching wide and open around them. The cattle were grazing peacefully, and Jean counted heads, noting which calves belonged to which cows. Hector rode beside her, his posture relaxed, his gaze sweeping the horizon.
It's beautiful out here.
It is.
I can see why you fought so hard for it.
It's worth fighting for.
She looked at him, and the understanding in his eyes told her he knew she wasn't just talking about the land. They rode back, as the sun began its descent, the sky turning soft shades of orange and lavender. At the barn, they unsaddled the horses and brushed them down, working in companionable silence. Jean felt a deep sense of rightness, as if all the pieces of her life had finally clicked into place. That evening, they sat on the porch again, watching the stars emerge. Jean had the quilt square in her lap, a needle and thread in her hands. She began stitching a new design, simple and clean.
What's that one?
Us. A new beginning.
I like it.
Hector reached over and took her free hand, holding it gently. Jean finished the last stitch and tied off the thread, then held up the square. It showed 2 intertwined rings, simple but strong.
Perfect.
Just like us.
Jean leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together as the night deepened, the future unfolding before them, full of promise and love.